One of the real thrills of joining a storytelling network is to meet people, and to meet people like Pete. He is one hell of a gentleman. As long as we're on the theme of cars, mine was not a 56, but a 56 Chevy. And my wife and I, next month, are actually going to visit that car as we head down to Havana. Many people tell me that I look a little bit young for my age, and yeah, I'm 66, about to be 67. And then many people then add, you must have had an easy life. Let's evaluate that. The summers in Washington, D.C. are like living in a sauna. And so it was in the summer of 1970. It was the end of my my sophomore year, and I was lost. Lost in the space between mental health and mental illness. That summer, everything, after I got my final grades, everything seemed to unravel. I couldn't think straight, I couldn't make decisions, I could not even decide which clothes to wear for that day. Eventually, my roommate, out of desperation, said, let's walk across the street to the University Medical Center, where I spent the next 3 months in the psych unit, trying to figure out why and how would I ever recover. Well, I did get out, and things seemed to be okay for an hour or two. And then about, I guess it was 2 weeks later, the symptoms came roaring back. I ended up walking in about an 8-block square area endlessly until my feet were bleeding. And then I stopped in front of the infamous Watergate Hotel and stripped naked. That earned me a return trip back to that psych unit. While in that psych unit, on the wall, I saw a photo of a renowned physician. I looked at that photo and said, I've just seen God. If I'm the only one that could see that, I must be Jesus. Which is a great delusion for a nice Jewish boy. Then I saw everybody moving around in like a gray shadow. And I heard voices. They were my parents' voices, telling me to resist. And then I did. As I flipped out, it took 6 orderlies. And as you can see, I'm not a big guy. But it took 6 orderlies to pin me down so that a nurse could shoot me in the butt with a shot of Thorazine. And then they threw me in the quiet room, which is a great euphemism for a room with padded walls, a urine-stained mat, and a little wooden cover on a little glass window, like a speakeasy, so that the staff could look in. When I got out, I eventually got out of the hospital, and I moved back to my hometown of Cincinnati, where I managed to spend the next 4 years outside of a psych unit. And then, in 1974, it was time for my sister to get married. My father, who was really a good guy, felt enormous pressure, especially financial pressure, from this wedding. And he took me aside and he said, Chuck, since you don't have a date, I want you to guard the booze so the hotel staff doesn't steal any. I reeled at the implication that he wanted me to be a security guard instead of just a member of the family. And within just a matter of days, I was back in a new psych unit for another 3 months. After 3 months, oh, and by the way, I missed my sister's wedding. I managed to be okay, but I made a terrible decision. I lived with my parents. One Sunday, they were about to leave on a day trip to visit some relatives. Before leaving, my mother approached me and said, Chuck, what did you do last night? I said, I had a wonderful date with a wonderful nurse from the hospital. You what? You had a date with a nurse? That's breaking the rules. You only care about yourself. You don't care about that nurse. You don't care about me. All you care about is yourself. You're going to hell. When they got home later that evening, they found me face down in a pool of urine next to the bathroom door. And next to my bed, in 3 vials of empty meds, they found the evidence of why I was lying down. A couple of days later, I woke up in the hospital with my arms and my legs strapped to the bed. The doctor came in and said, you know, you're lucky to be alive, much less not to have suffered brain damage. And folks, that was the most successful failure of my life. If it had not been for that failure, I wouldn't be here tonight. I have to tell you, 1970 to 1978 was just pure hell for me. I couldn't keep a job. I couldn't keep relationships. The only thing I managed to keep hold of was my illness. Well, 2 years managed to pass, and once again, it seemed like a pattern. 2 years, 3 months out, and 3 months back in. Well, the reason why I was back in, it was my turn to get married. It was a disaster for both of us. It was short-lived, and while the nation celebrated our 200th anniversary of our founding, I was back in a quiet room. When I got out and went back in, hope was finally on the horizon for 2 reasons. One is very bizarre. January of 1977 in Cincinnati was the coldest month of the year ever in recorded history. That same month, I was assigned to work in a sheltered workshop. I had to catch a bus at 7:30 in the morning to go cross town so I could do my job of counting and bagging screws. I have to tell you, I was really good at that job because from that job, I got a job in the local daily newspaper in the retail advertising department as an advertising executive. But the really good sign of hope was when I met a friend in the hospital. His name was Jeff. And when Jeff wasn't trying to escape on a daily basis, he and I had some great conversations. Excuse me. And in one of those conversations, he said, "What's your diagnosis?" And I said, "Well, Jeff, for the last 6 years, I've been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic." And he shook his head. He said, "I don't buy it." He said, "I think you're like me." He said, "I think you have manic depression." The first thing I could think of was Jimi Hendrix. Manic depression is a frustrated mess. And that defined me. But he also said, "Here's my doctor's number. You may not need it, but if you ever do, here's his number. He's a specialist in manic depression." And sure enough, 2 years later, while in that job at the local daily newspaper, the symptoms resurged and came back. But this time I realized this could be a turning point in my recovery and in my life. So I called that doctor. The next day he met me in the hospital. He said, "You know, I've checked your charts. I'm looking at you, and I think I agree with your friend. You might very well have bipolar disorder." It was the first time I heard that phrase, which I have since changed to bipolar condition. I'm not broken. I'm not a vending machine that needs a sign that says out of order. I'm a human being that has a condition that I wrestle with and I've managed to deal with well. Well, he said, "You know, the only way to really tell is to try to see if we can give you lithium, and if that works, we know. If it doesn't, it's back to square zero." In a matter of just a day or two, my life as I knew it returned. My mind was clear. I could think clearly. My emotions seemed to be in check. Life had come around again. But that was not the best medication. Oh, and by the way, I've been on medication for 39 years, and I've been hospital-free for 39 years as well. But the best medication came the following year. I met the most incredible woman. She was attractive, smart as the dickens, and funny. And she got to know me, and she got to like me for who I am. The diagnosis didn't matter. And then she came to love me. And Cindy and I love you. Excuse me. Been married for 36 years. And then I had some unfinished business, so I went back to college and I earned that elusive bachelor's degree and was asked to be the spokesperson for the graduating class at commencement. My wife, my two very young sons, my parents, and a couple of friends were in attendance. Life had come full circle, and that was a defining moment. Then it was time to finally tell my sons, who had grown and matured, the true story. So when my elder son was 17, my son Drew, I sat him on the couch and I told him a variation of what I'm telling you tonight. Drew cried. Drew's not an emotional guy whatsoever. He cried. And he said, "Dad, I love you." And he grabbed me. And then he said, "Dad, I love you forever." A few years later, his younger brother Greg was of age. He was 17. And I told him. Greg had a different conclusion. His answer was, "Dad, I don't buy it. That's no way in the world is that true." He said, "You're too together as a man, and you're too great as a father for that to fit you." Life had come full circle. And I've never had any more secrets to tell my son. And then, you may not know this, but people that have bipolar disorder have difficulty holding jobs. I can tell you, I am fantastic at getting a job. Keeping a job, not so good. So I started my own business, and it was a successful business from which I retired just a few years ago. You know what? I have so much to be thankful for. I have a long and loving marriage. I have two incredible sons. And now I'm out of the bipolar closet because I can share this story with you. Thank you.